I once had it all. A loving wife, a promising career, a future bright with dreams. But behind closed doors, betrayal lurked. Janet, my wife, found solace in the arms of another man. In the shadow of their affair, I was left shattered, humiliated, and burning with rage. My heart twisted as I watched them flaunt their love, while her father smirked in approval. The woman I adored was nothing more than a deceitful stranger. This is the story of how my perfect world crumbled and how, in the ashes, I found a chance for revenge. Sun said I met Janet on a porch in Adams Morgan one warm night in D.C. It was a typical summer day. The heat and humidity were both near 100 degrees. I was sweating a lot. No one in their right mind would stay in Washington in July. Even the Congress members take a long break then. But my grad school work kept me there. So there I was, suffering. It was really miserable. D.C. was built on land given by Maryland and Virginia, and our founding fathers did not donate good farmland for it. So they gave the nation a piece of swamp by the Potomac River. And even though it's now covered with lots of expensive buildings, the swamp feeling still lingers. I quickly noticed two things about my future wife. First, she was lounging on an old porch couch looking very drunk, which seemed to solve my problem. I had not been with anyone in a long time, so I wasn't looking for love. Secondly, she had a very nice chest. It might seem shallow to notice her chest first. But people say, you can't judge a personality by looks. She had a cute oval face, not beautiful but nice, and thick brown hair that flowed down her back. She had very full and sculpted lips. Movie stars pay a lot for lips like that. She wasn't passed out. She just seemed a bit out of it. In short, she was exactly what I was looking for in a woman. I am not a bad person. I would never force anyone. I am just someone who usually needs a lot of alcohol to get lucky. The fact is, I do better with women when their judgment is impaired. I sat down next to her. She gave me a silly smile and slurred, "I was hoping you would come over to talk to me." This was new. Most of the time, when I sit next to a pretty girl, I get told to leave. I am average in every way, height, weight, and looks, and my approach to women needs work. So they usually decide not to talk to me. Having one actually say she was hoping I would talk to her was new. I tried my best charming look and said, "Do I know you?" "Darn, that wasn't very charming." She said in a very drunk voice, "I was in your cryptology class last year. Don't you remember me?" Wow, at least she saw me in my element. I thought, any woman who takes an advanced code-breaking class is a true nerd, and I am the king of them. Maybe that will make up for what I lack, like looks, money, and sex appeal, not to mention some personal hygiene. This little nerd might be the girl I've been searching for my entire life. But I still didn't remember her. I asked for her name, and she told me, "Janet Askew." I recalled a Janet Askew, but she was much bigger and had bangs that made her look like she was from a 1950s comic. This woman had a trim and curvy figure with a great chest and dressed very well. I looked confused. She giggled drunkenly and said, "You knew me before I lost all that weight. I had issues after my parents' divorce. It took a lot of therapy and a crash diet, but I'm back to my normal self now." I took a second look at her. She was not beautiful, but she was very sexy. She had an everyday pretty face and the mentioned chest, but she also had long, slim legs and nice round hips in tight jeans. A little yellow top showed some cleavage. She was looking at me warmly, so I decided to kiss her. Remember, we were sitting in the dark on the front porch outside a loud party. We had known each other for maybe 90 seconds at that point. She surprised me by not pushing me away. Instead, she put one arm around my neck, pressed herself against me, and gave me the hottest kiss I had ever had. It was like she had been waiting her whole life to do that. I don't believe in random good luck. But it had been a long, dry spell, so I was not going to question it. Both of us were breathing heavily, but it was dark. There was no solid proof that I had been touching her chest just 10 seconds earlier. Seeing that neither of us was in trouble, and my discomfort wasn't obvious, the group of people looking to help ran past us, heading to the sidewalk to find the source of the scream. She looked at me. I looked at her. Then we both started laughing. We had only known each other for about 15 minutes, but I just knew I wanted to marry this funny and unique woman. The next night, We spent a long, hot night together that matched the sweltering weather of D.C. We got married just 4 months later and moved into a nice little apartment further out the Red Line in Shady Grove. You might think it was foolish to marry so quickly, but Janet's charm clouded my judgment. If I had thought about it more, I might have been cautious. Yet Janet was so attractive and I was so eager for her. Our first few months together were like a dream. I couldn't imagine a more perfect partner or a better life. We just got along perfectly. We spent a lot of time together and explored everything interesting that the city had to offer. Everyone thought we were a perfect couple. Some pairs are overly affectionate, but Janet was very smart. Our life was built around our minds. We joked with each other, shared witty comments, and had a playful view of the world. It was hard not to love a woman who found humor in everything. It all seemed too perfect. And of course it was. The first sign of trouble came when I met her father. We had a quick civil wedding, like true nerds. But she kept asking me to meet her dad, to get his blessing. So we took the Acela train to New York City that weekend. I knew her dad lived in Manhattan, but I didn't know his place was overlooking Central Park in the upper 80s. Her dad had inherited his money. As F. Scott Fitzgerald said, "The rich are different from you and me." Her dad treated me with the same disdain a noble might show to a poor farmer his daughter had brought home. It was like he expected me to bow to him. In short, I hated him instantly. Janet also changed completely. She went from open and friendly to rude and snobbish. She clearly thought she was better than the little people. Since I was one of these little people, I was shocked. It was also clear that her parents' breakup was due to her dad's cheating. He didn't try to hide it. He acted like he had the right to be with any woman he met, much like a king believing in divine right. Sadly, I found out what that meant in the worst way. He took us to the Carlyle for dinner. It was so fancy that I knew he had planned it to show off. Janet wore a tight black dress and high heels, drawing attention everywhere. Both she and her dad looked like sophisticated New Yorkers. Me, not so much. I didn't do anything too embarrassing, but I wasn't the star of the evening either. Her dad kept asking about my job, and I tried to explain my new position at Georgetown as an associate professor. This was a big deal, but he dismissed it, calling me a teacher, like it was nothing special. I was not making the kind of money Janet was used to, but I was on a solid career path. Looking back, I understood the implications. At the time, I felt both inadequate and angry. I saw nothing about him to justify his high opinion of himself, except his birthright. It hurt that Janet didn't stand up for me, but I knew she had daddy issues, and I loved her, so I let it go. Still, it didn't make me feel better about her. What also bothered me was how her dad treated her. It was like she was his date. He was touching his daughter in a way that would have made me call social services if she were 13, not 23. It was even worse because she allowed it, which made me unhappy. Both got very drunk. I helped them into a cab, and we headed back across the park to 86th Street. I sat in front while they slumped in the back. I was planning to have a serious talk with my wife once we were alone. That's when I heard rustling and a moan from the back seat. My eyes shot open. I peeked around the separator, and there they were, in a close embrace. It wasn't explicitly sexual, but dads don't hug their daughters like that. Both were drunk, and maybe, for a moment, she thought it was me. She had her leg over his and was snuggled up to him in a way that just didn't seem right. My first thought was to stop the cab, haul Dad out, and give him a piece of my mind. But I chose to just say loudly, "We're nearly home now." They both jumped and looked guilty. I stared at her, hoping to show her exactly what I thought was going on. She moved to the corner of the seat, looking upset. Once we got into the bedroom, I asked, "What were you doing? Were you really planning on getting cozy with him right there? He's your dad, remember?" She looked down and said, "I wasn't doing anything wrong. Daddy hugs me like that all the time." I started to think maybe my wife wasn't quite right in the head, at least when it came to her dad. It certainly explained her strange behavior from Friday. She seemed to change around him like a chameleon. I said, "Do you realize what you were doing back there wasn't right between a father and daughter?" She glared at me and said, "Just because you don't like it doesn't mean it's wrong. Daddy has always taken care of me and loves me. There is love and then there is love." But arguing wouldn't help. We were going home in the morning, so I said, "Let's get some sleep. We'll talk about this tomorrow." The next morning, my wife acted like herself again. Her body language, voice, and attitude were back to normal. It was like she had put away the person she was last night. It was kind of creepy. We took a taxi down to Penn Station, and she was her usual lively and fun self. It felt like a dark cloud had lifted from our marriage. The night before had been odd, but I had months to get to know Janet. I thought she was a warm and smart person. I knew it was normal for someone to act differently around a parent. In fact, it would have been weirder if she hadn't. But what I saw with her dad was not something I approved of or wanted to see again. Moving forward, I made a mental note to avoid her dad, Templeton Askew, and never let them be alone together in a weird way again. Janet's shifting from one person to another could have worried me if it had lasted longer, but it was just one day, so I didn't stress too much about it. I should have. The next 5 years went by happily. The most important thing during that time was the data compression algorithm I created. Data compression is key for machine vision, used in things like search engines and missiles, so it's a big deal for us tech nerds. I worked on a better lossless algorithm during my last days at GWU. I perfected it 2 years later. I'm too naive to handle the business side, but my friend Scott was great at that. He did the hard work, and I got a 40% share as a silent partner. Our first contract was with Raytheon. Right away, their targeting system got much better, and my bank account got a lot bigger. I'm a tech nerd. I don't care about money or know anything about finance, so I had Scott handle all of it. I never talked about our money with Janet. In my mind, it would have sounded like bragging, and nerds don't flaunt their earnings. Points in video games like World of Warcraft? Sure. But money? Never. It would have sounded as silly as the bragging among Janet's high society friends. I just went on like nothing had changed. Later, I was really glad I did that. The money was great because it gave me the freedom to do what I loved. I had been teaching and I liked it, so I kept my job. But I did buy a place in Georgetown with cash. Janet didn't seem to notice. She probably thought I had taken out a huge loan. The only big change was that it was now an easy walk to work. Janet herself had changed a lot. The 23-year-old I met in Adams Morgan was now a 28-year-old with a sense of style I could only dream of. Most of our life together was still full of fun and interesting chats. But she started to act more serious and fancy. She also became really beautiful. She had been cute and slim when we first met. But as she got into her late 20s, her face grew more refined, and her body filled out nicely. She had always had lovely looks, and those stayed the same. But now her hips and behind looked amazing, too. She was truly stunning. She never asked about money. It was just always there for her. So she took up all the rich person fashion and grooming tricks to go from pretty to stunning. In short, she was now way out of my league socially. Sadly, I am not refined or sophisticated, and I never will be. I live mostly in my head and don't want to be socially prominent. My world is in my mind, and that's where I am happiest. The good news was that my skills and interests supported Janet's lifestyle. The bad news was that we started to drift apart. We might have been perfect together once, but now we were different. As time passed, we started living in different worlds. Janet liked fancy events. My idea of a good night was sitting at Blues Alley. She liked the big crowds at the Verizon Center. I enjoyed the quiet of our sailboat on the Potomac. You can see where this is going, and it went there. Most of the time, our life was easy, but it was clear we were not as close as before. This showed in our sometimes tense talks and our poor love life. But I didn't see the bomb coming until it exploded. I knew I wasn't very social, and I knew changes had to happen, but I didn't think much more about it. Janet, on the other hand, had already decided. Maybe the right term is already out the door. One bright, sunny morning in May, I came back from class. The DC weather was perfect. I put my laptop bag on the table in the hall. I walked into the living room, whistling, and I stopped dead in my tracks, shocked by what I saw. Janet was sitting nervously on the couch, holding the hand of a tall, good-looking guy. Templeton Askew was lounging on the other couch facing them. Every alarm in my head went off. Whatever was about to happen was going to be bad. Janet looked at me sadly and said, "Jake, we need to talk." I stared at her. She looked anxious. Templeton was smirking. And who was the other guy? Was he her lawyer? Actually, he was Janet's lawyer, but he was also her lover. She said, "Jake, this hurts me a lot, But I need you to know I am leaving you. I could have just disappeared, but I wanted to tell you directly. Holy crap. I sank down in the nearest chair. I don't know what my face showed, but my soon-to-be ex-father-in-law looked delighted. She was leaving me? Where did that come from? I probably looked confused. I babbled, "You're leaving me? Why? What did I do? What will happen to me?" She pretended to be concerned and said, "You'll be fine. You're a strong person. Burton and I found each other again and we can't be apart." Templeton said with disdain in his voice, "Janet and Burton were childhood sweethearts. He is the right person for her. Janet knows they never should have parted. Burton didn't really cheat on her. He was just having fun. He is ready to settle down now, and Janet has agreed to be his wife," I said pitifully. "But she's my wife." Damn, I sounded like a weak fool. It was so embarrassing. The raw humiliation and arrogance in Daddy's voice pushed me over the edge. I didn't know I had it in me, but I just hulked out. Suddenly, all I could think was, "Smash, puny humans." I turned to Daddy and said, "If you say one more word, I will rip off your head." He started to speak, then saw the real anger in my eyes. He made a zipping motion across his lips, point match to Jake Barnes. I turned to my faithless, formerly known as wife, and said, "Are you telling me this guy is your childhood sweetheart and you're leaving me for him? How long have you been seeing him?" The guy said, "Now look here, old boy." I turned toward him and said, "Where I come from, we should be fighting right now. So unless you want to go to the parking lot, stay out of it. This is between me and my soon-to-be ex-wife." He just sat there, looking disgusted. I turned to her and said, "Okay, tell me. How long has this been going on, and what do you plan to do next?" Janet looked surprised and angry. She didn't expect this. She said, "Daddy hasn't felt you were right for me since our first trip to New York. He urged me to give Burton another chance. Burton came down here to take me to the Washington National Opera last November. It was the one you didn't want to attend." I remembered that. She had thrown a party in a suite I got for her at the Jefferson. I expected a fight when I told her I didn't want to go, but she came home the next day sweet and loving. I said, "So, you have been seeing this guy for 6 months then?" She looked hurt and said, "Such harsh language, Jake. It doesn't reflect well on you. But to answer your question, Burton and I have been a couple since that evening. I'm surprised you didn't hear about it since we haven't kept it a secret. But then you don't move in our circles. We want to make it permanent now. I need you to let me go so I can marry the person I should have been with from the start. I love you, but I haven't been in love with you for some time." I looked at the lying woman and her deceitful father. Then I turned my attention to Shithead. I said, "So you want to marry her knowing what kind of cheater she is?" He spat out, "Now listen here. You can't talk about Janet like that." I replied, "How should I talk about her? I gave her all my love and dedication. I spent money so she could pretend she was some high society lady. I never even looked at another woman. All I wanted was to raise kids with her and die beside her. And for that, she's been sleeping with you for the past 6 months and maybe even her dad too." Both of them exploded with anger. I glared at them with fury. They went silent. They didn't deny it either. I looked at the man and his face turned bright red. I said calmly, "Is this what you all really want?" The man looked thoughtful. Her dad looked furious and Janet looked serious. Janet said angrily, "It's what we all want, Jake. You need to let me go. I've already moved all my things to Burton's place. When I leave here, I'm never coming back. I don't want anything from you, just a quick divorce. Burton is much richer than you. I don't need anything except your blessing." I looked at her, truly shocked. She really thought I would just smile and say, "All right, have a great life." Seriously? I couldn't believe how naive she was. I looked them in the eye and said, "I hope you all rot in hell." There was a collective gasp. With that, I got up and stormed out. I needed to go somewhere or I might have hurt them all. I'm usually not an impulsive person. I plan things in my head. So I walked along the C&O towpath to Key Park, trying to calm down. I sat on a bench and watched the planes fly low over Roslyn toward DCA. The day was beautiful, but my mind was racing. I don't know how others handle personal betrayal. I felt numb. I knew it was a betrayal. I just didn't know how to feel about it. There wasn't much pain. Maybe I didn't love her as much as I thought. Still, there was an empty space in my heart now. It was like all the certainty had left me. I wasn't going to cry over her. Maybe it's because I don't think crying over lost love is very manly. She clearly wasn't who I thought she was and made her choice. So be it. Her leaving didn't change the rest of my life much. In some ways, nothing important would change at all, except I'd be rid of a cheating wife. I was still young and richer than I ever imagined. Janet and her father had so much contempt for me that they didn't bother looking into my finances. Bad move in the information age. Just look at Bill Gates. I knew two things for sure. First, I would never trust another person. Against my better judgment, I had given my heart to Janet, and look where that got me. So I would never make the mistake of trusting someone like that again. Second, I needed to get away from this place. Thanks to my little computer program, I could do anything I wanted. And the last thing I needed was a reminder of how bad my life had just become. My life felt pointless anyway, so I might as well have some fun in the meantime. Sunrise, I was heading back to the RERB stop at the Gare de la Plaine in Saint-Denis. People say it's like Detroit with couscous. Looking at the run-down buildings, I could see why. 20 minutes earlier, I was standing at one of the third-tier access tunnels at the Stade de France. From there, I could see about 80,000 people. I don't care much for what the French call football, but I wasn't there to watch it. I took the RER out to Saint-Denis to see where I was in my recovery. It was a kind of mental check. Some people go to church. Some people meditate on a mountain. I go to sports events to try to understand my place in the world. I like seeing the big picture when I'm thinking about where I fit. Nothing is better than a stadium full of people for getting a useful view of life. I had been trying to figure out my path since the divorce. It may sound strange for a rich person to be confused about direction, but I felt totally apart from humanity. In a way, I had gone wild. Betrayal does that to you. You just don't trust anyone. It was like standing out in the cold watching a party inside, not knowing how to join in. I had no idea what steps to take to start acting normal again. Drifting wasn't an option. I knew I had to decide soon, or time would force a decision on me. The whole spectrum of humanity was on display below. I looked at the excited fans and the tears. Every one of those people had hopes and dreams, and each one probably thought they mattered. I looked at the backs of their heads. All I could see was a sea of hair, varying in color and length, but none of them stood out. They were like a crowd of lemmings. I shook my head and walked back down the steps. Still no answers. Behind me, the whole place erupted in cheers as someone did something amazing, which would be replaced by another amazing feat the following week. I sighed. At least I had confirmed what I came to learn. Feeling insignificant is part of being human. I took the Paris subway back to the FDR stop near the Arc de Triomphe. Then I walked back to my hotel. I was staying at the Hotel California in the 8th arrondissement. Look it up. It's a real place. I often wondered if the French understood the irony of the Eagles' song. You can check out any time you like, but you can never leave. This place suited me perfectly. I had been in Paris for the last 4 months, ever since my divorce was finalized. I needed to be anywhere but D.C. So I asked for a break to sort myself out. The folks at Georgetown were more than happy to give it to me. My teaching had been really bad for the past semester. Meanwhile, my ex-wife was becoming a popular figure in D.C. I guess our breakup was her coming-out party. She and her new boyfriend looked disgustingly happy. Seeing pictures of Janet and her new boyfriend in the newspapers was ruining my mornings. Janet seemed as arrogant as her new partner. She was like a chameleon, blending in with whoever she was with at the time. Her betrayal was hard to accept, but she was clearly not all there mentally. I think doctors call it a dissociative disorder. I first noticed it when she became a different person during a visit to her dad in New York. I didn't understand it then. Whoever was in her head likely didn't know the others existed. That's why she fooled me for so long. But she seemed like she had 2 or 3 entirely separate personalities. The Janet I first met was warm and kind. The others were cold, calculating, and arrogant. The cause of her different personalities probably came from something terrible in her past. Her dad seemed to trigger these changes, so he might have been the cause of her trauma. I often hoped she was still close to her controlling dad. That would mess with her new boyfriend's breakfast one morning. Or maybe her new boyfriend liked to watch their interactions. He seemed like the type. Maybe that was why her dad approved of him. Whatever the case, dealing with Janet had put me off dating for good. Sitting there, I mumbled to myself, I should give up on relationships. I didn't even find women attractive anymore. So why was a cynical nerd like me in Paris? The answer was, I needed change. What happened with Janet messed up everything I thought was certain. I needed a reset if I wanted to move on with my life. Up until the divorce, my life had a clear path. Do well in school, get a good job, marry a loving and faithful woman, raise kids together, and live happily ever after. That didn't work out so well. So I needed a fresh start. Paris was far from my old life. I consciously chose not to go to an English-speaking country. I didn't want anything familiar. Paris was an alien place for a guy like me, whose idea of foreign was a trip to Comic-Con. But as Hemingway said, Paris is like an ongoing feast. Moving here was helping. Each day, my old life faded more and more. My confidence was starting to return. Normally, I would meet my friend Bob Cohn at Le Fouquet's on the Champs-Élysées. We could people-watch over drinks and snacks, but it was raining hard. Paris might be a romantic's dream at times, but it was cold, gray, and miserable that April day. Bob was part of a group of English-speaking expats in Paris. He wanted to avoid adult responsibilities back in the States. We were all in Paris looking for something. We connected over our common language. Bob had inherited money, not earned it. But he was tough. He was taller than me, more handsome than Janet's new guy, and weighed around 220 pounds. He played football at Harvard and was every bit the confident, entitled alpha. For some reason, Bob seemed to be following me. He called or suggested meeting up every day. I didn't think it was because of my charm. Maybe he liked the world-weary vibe I gave off. Or he had an idea of who I really was. By that point, I was incredibly rich. I didn't act or dress like a millionaire. I opted for casual clothing, not a luxurious lifestyle. But that's common for nerds like me. Money meant little to us, so we didn't keep track of it closely. Staying at the Hotel California was expensive, but it was nothing compared to how fast my wealth was growing. The most costly thing I owned was my condo, which had almost doubled in value, but I paid for it in cash. So my only connection to it was through the current renter, and he was only making me richer. As he walked into the little bar off the lobby at the California Hotel, Cohn was dressed like he stepped out of a Ralph Lauren ad. He moved like a big cat. Graceful is the word that comes to mind. He is actually a tough and dangerous guy. But because he always had money, he could act carefree, like he was born that way. He wore a very expensive black t-shirt and leather jacket combo. His thick, curly brown hair was covered by a fedora, which looked like it belonged to Indiana Jones. His bright blue eyes seemed to catch the attention of every woman in the bar. He came in, shaking off the rain. He said, "Where were you today? I tried to change the plan, but you didn't answer." I didn't want to admit I had been in St. Denis feeling sorry for myself. I would have sounded weak. So instead, I told him that I spent the afternoon writing and didn't want to be disturbed. I was working on pieces for various journals as an excuse for being in Paris. That seemed to satisfy him. He said, "I wanted to spend the night at Bugsy's. Bill and Mike are meeting us there." Those two were ex-military. They had served with the 173rd RCT based in Italy and stayed in Europe after leaving the military. They lived together in a rundown little apartment near Montmartre. Bill Gorton was a steady guy. Mike Campbell had PTSD issues. The Sky Soldiers had faced serious battles in Iraq and Afghanistan. Mike was dealing with the aftermath. The rain had stopped as we stepped onto the Rue de Berry. Bugsy's was less than a mile down the Rue du Faubourg. Taking a taxi seemed pointless, especially since Parisian cab drivers rarely stopped for us. So we walked the 15 minutes down there. Bugsy's is a mix between an American sports bar and an old French idea of 1920s Chicago. It's always crowded because it has the best cheeseburgers. It's also a hangout for Americans like Cohn and me. American tourists prefer Harry's Bar on Rue Daunou. Given the high drink prices and the middle American clientele, I can't imagine writers like Hemingway or the Duke of Windsor would drink there now. Getting a table is usually tough, but Bill and Mike got there early and saved one for us. I knew they had been there a while because Mike was already drunk. As we pushed through the crowd, my attention was not on my two friends. Cohn and I were both looking at the person next to Mike. Words like, "stunning" don't truly describe a woman like her. She didn't just look beautiful, she had a special charm that was hard to ignore. Certain famous actresses and models have that quality. I had never seen it before, but I recognized it right away in her. I felt a strange excitement. It was a miracle, no pun intended. Meanwhile, I thought Cone might go over and propose on the spot. We took the outside seats. Mike was slumped against the wall, his arm around the woman next to him. Cone quickly took the seat next to her. The woman looked at Cone with interest and said in a rich British accent, "Lady Brett Ashley, and who are you?" Even from across the table, I was enchanted by Lady Brett. She had perfectly balanced features, big, beautiful eyes, a kissable mouth, a long nose, and golden blonde hair. Her hair framed a face that looked like it belonged in a painting. She was dressed casually, but in expensive clothes. The perfume she wore made my heart race. It was unmistakably luxurious, and she wore enough gold to make anyone jealous. A $20,000 Rolex with diamonds finished off her look. But it was her smoky gray eyes that held both Cone and me captive. They signaled both class and wild passion. Cone's tongue nearly hit the floor like a cartoon character. He stuttered, "Robert Cone, at your service, my lady." I had never seen him nervous around a woman before. Mike had brought her, but since he was out of it, Cone got her attention. He loved it. She turned to me with the same amused look and asked, "And you are?" I said, "Jake Barnes, Lady Ashley. Cone and I are all in the same group as Bill and Mike." She laughed softly and said, "You Americans have such funny old-fashioned slang. Does that mean you all want me?" She gave me a smoldering glance that would have excited anyone if my bitter wife hadn't already ruined everything for me. So I said casually, "Some of us want you as you mean. Some of us are just here for the cheeseburgers. You can't get a good burger in France except at Bugsy's." Then I excused myself to get us some beer, which was also excellent. The French surprisingly know how to make good beer. The bar was its usual busy scene, so it took a while. I couldn't get anyone to serve me. It wasn't because I was an American. It was just the way Paris was. All the waiters in the city acted rude. When I got back, Lady Ashley was leaning into her date while flirting wildly with Cone on her other side. Lady Brett was stunning, both her face and figure. She leaned on Mike's chest, her head on his shoulder, but her eyes were on Cone. Mike had his arm around her shoulder, his hand resting on her chest. Some women might have been uncomfortable with this, but not Brett. She acted like Mike's touch was a compliment. Cone could not look away from her. She was giving him a lot of attention. I wondered if Campbell noticed what was happening. She was good at managing both men. Campbell thought she was with him, but the rest of us saw that she wanted Cone. Indeed, it was clear that Lady Brett did not have strong morals. I held back judgment because Brett was open about her behavior, not sneaky like some women I knew. I placed a beer in front of Cone. He glanced at me with a cheeky smile and went back to charming Lady Brett. His blue eyes sparkled with mischief. Her eyes looked full of desire. Gorton and I shared an amused look as I sat next to him. I knew he thought Mike was not very bright. Watching Cone make a move on Brett right in front of Mike was almost entertaining. I really liked Gorton. He was always tough, with close-cropped hair in his mid-30s. But mainly, he had a great sense of humor that was always on display. He was almost laughing out loud at what was happening at the table. With all the tension in the air, it was hard to talk about anything serious. But I asked Gorton what he and Campbell were planning. He told me they were going to drive down to the Grand Prix in Monaco in 3 weeks. He said, "We've got a buddy with a boat there. He invited us. The race cars go right past where he's docked. It's going to be a party. Why don't you come along?" I was curious how Gorton knew someone rich enough to have such a prime spot. But those two moved around a lot when they were in the military. Plus, they had that tough guy vibe, so it wasn't hard to believe that a rich person would want them around. It turned out the boat belonged to a Kuwaiti. That made sense, given what Bill and Mike had done in that part of the world. The more I thought about it, the better it sounded. I had spent too much time alone because of Janet, and hanging out in Monaco for the Monte Carlo Grand Prix sounded amazing. I would never go there by myself, but Bill Gorton was fun to be with, and Mike Campbell was a good guy, even though he drank a lot. So, we made plans. Meanwhile, Cone and Lady Ashley had finished their little game. Something had passed between them. Gorton and I didn't care what it was, and Mike was too drunk to notice. We all went our separate ways in the rainy Paris night. I walked back to the hotel. Bill, Mike, and Lady Brett went to their rundown place in Montmartre. Bill told me later that Mike and Brett kept him awake most nights with their noise, but he couldn't afford to move out. Cone went off somewhere. I got the feeling there was someone waiting for him. I didn't see Cone for a while after that. Monaco is a long drive from Paris. Bill and Mike shared a used Peugeot 107. No way was I going to sit in that tiny car for 9 hours, so I bought a Range Rover Evoque for the trip. I told them I rented it. They asked how I could afford it since it costs a lot to rent. I told them a rich uncle left me money for one big splurge. I arranged to stay at the Hermitage, but I didn't want the guys to know how rich I was, so I told them I would sleep in the car in the hills. I didn't feel bad about lying. My money is my business. They were staying on the boat with their friend. I dropped them at the water taxis that were heading to the boats. I said I would see them at the Explorers Pub for lunch the next day, which was close to Port Hercules. Then we could plan our 3 days in town. I think they felt sorry for me because there was no room for me, but it didn't stop them from leaving me at the dock. The boat they were going to was huge, almost like an aircraft carrier. Their Kuwaiti friend must have been really rich. I drove to the Hermitage. It was close to where I dropped the guys. The streets leading to the hotel were a bit confusing, but luckily the French drive on the same side as we do. I checked in. It was still only 8 p.m., so I wandered down to the Crystal Terrace for a drink. I was looking at the boats in Port Hercules, thinking, maybe I should buy something like that. I could afford it. I was sipping a Pernod when I felt something change around me. People were looking around, just like animals do in the wild when a predator shows up. What caught everyone's eye was a very attractive couple. They had just walked in holding hands. The man was tall and very muscular and extremely good-looking, but his partner's beauty surpassed his. Even though I had seen her before, I was still stunned. Her face and body were incredibly beautiful, and she had an aura of confidence as she walked. Her partner seemed surprised, but then smiled warmly. It looked like he was genuinely happy to see me. They came over to where I was sitting. He was smiling, and she had her usual mysterious look. I smiled back. My plan was to act like I expected them. I had a feeling they might show up, but I wasn't certain until now. I said, "Sit down, Robert. It's been a long time." Then I stood up to offer the lady a chair. As she sat down, she looked at me with a gaze that was intense. She said, "Robert told me that you were very rich, but I didn't believe it until now." I looked at Robert. He gave me a playful shrug and said, "My father runs the investment fund that your finance guy uses." I sat down and said, "I haven't seen you in ages, buddy. I guess she's the reason." And I nodded toward the lady. She was settling into her chair, her actions graceful. She said, "Yes, Robert took me to Ibiza for 3 weeks. We've been learning a lot about each other." I asked her, "Have you talked to Mike Campbell recently?" She said, "I last spoke to Mike the day after I met you two. I told him I was going home to see my family." And she smiled warmly at Robert. I said, "Well, he and Bill Gorton are here for the Grand Prix. Are you here for that too? Will it be a problem?" The lady gave me a look as if I was foolish. She said, "I hope not. He was just a temporary thing. He knows that." Her face was calm as she said that she saw my friend as just a fleeting interest. It was a tricky situation. She and Campbell weren't married or exclusive, but she seemed like someone who moved from one person to another. I wondered what Robert thought about that. But the chance to spend 3 weeks in a beautiful place with a woman like her was probably worth any issues for him, and I doubted that she was just passive in their relationship. Plus, Robert was known to date around too. I got the feeling they were a good match. We were catching up when I noticed someone else coming toward the table. It was another woman. She walked up, kissed the lady on the cheek, and hugged Robert from behind. He chuckled softly. She said cheerfully, with an accent that meant something to me, "What a lovely evening, and who is this?" She nodded at me. British accents are very distinct, even more so than ours, and this woman had an accent I knew well from my days studying in Cambridge. No matter where they went to school in the UK, all the academic women sounded like her. She walked quickly over to me and held out her hand. She said, "Britannia Ashley, but everyone calls me Britt. I am Brett's younger sister. Our parents liked names that started with the same letter." I took her hand and mumbled my name, Jake Barnes. It was probably the clumsiest introduction ever, but I was not good in social situations, and this woman had totally thrown me off. She was as beautiful as her sister, but in a more understated way. Her blonde hair was cut neatly and framed her face perfectly. Her features were even and well-proportioned, and her smile was wide and friendly. She had the same striking gray eyes as her sister, but hers showed intelligence and humor. She had a fit and graceful body, not as full-figured as her sister, but very attractive. Her chest was well-proportioned, fitting her body perfectly. I admit it, I always noticed that first. It's just a habit. Britt's chest wasn't as attention-grabbing as her sister's, but in many ways they were more fitting for her body, and they added to her overall beauty, not distracted from it. At first glance, Britt might seem more strikingly beautiful, but when you compared them, you realized Britt had it all: beauty, intelligence, and poise. Britt was just about looks. Britt had much more to offer. I was my usual tongue-tied self, so I just sat there. Britt said dismissively, "My sister is the smart one. She's at Oxford doing something really boring. She works too much. We had to drag her away from her computers this weekend for some fun." I looked at Britt, and she blushed. She said, "I like to work. My sister is the one who likes to party." I glanced over at Britt. She was making intense eye contact with Robert. I hoped she wasn't planning to be with him right there on the patio. Even the French wouldn't allow that. Britt snapped out of her daydream and said to us, "Robert and I need to go to the room. Can you two keep each other company for the evening?" Before we could respond, she got up and started pulling Cone toward the exit. I looked at Britt. She raised her eyebrows and asked, "Should we order a drink, or are you leaving too?" I waved over a waiter and asked for another drink. Britt ordered a white wine. Then we fell silent. I could hear the crickets and the water a few hundred yards away. The silence became awkward, so I said, "I'm sorry I'm not very fun to talk to. I'm not really good at socializing, especially with someone as beautiful as you." She looked surprised and said, "You think I'm beautiful? I always thought I was the less attractive sister. It's hard growing up with someone like Britt." I said, maybe too eagerly, "I think you are the most beautiful woman I have ever met." Wow, that was smooth. No wonder Janet couldn't wait to leave me. Britt looked at me thoughtfully and asked, "So, are you married?" Maybe she wasn't completely put off by me. I tried to stay neutral. "I used to be, but she found someone better." Britt looked sympathetic and put her hand on mine. It felt electric. I hadn't thought about a woman in over a year, but her touch reminded me of what it used to feel like. She said sincerely, "That must have hurt a lot." I said, "It wasn't as much pain as it was feeling pushed aside. Now I just don't trust anyone." I realized I was sharing too much, so I changed the topic. "Enough about me. What do you do at Oxford?" That made her happy. She spent 15 minutes excitedly telling me about her research. It was clear that Lady Britt Ashley was a talented scientist. It all seemed too perfect. People don't just accidentally meet beautiful fellow travelers who share their interests and have convenient sisters to pair them up. I almost asked if she had been hired by Cone to break my heart. I went quiet again. She looked worried and asked, "What's wrong?" I was going to say, "Oh, nothing," but I realized I had a better way to distract her while planning my exit. I said, "Your sister is very interesting." She looked disgusted and said, "Interesting is one way to put it. Britt does what she wants. She can't tell right from wrong, only what feels good. Her looks get her out of trouble that would ruin most women. Anyone who gets involved with her will get hurt." She gave me a worried look and said, "I hope you're not one of her many admirers." I laughed and said, "I don't admire anyone. I gave up on relationships when my ex-wife left me. I'm not a big fan of people in general." She looked sad and said, "So there's nobody you're close to?" I looked at her sincere face and almost said, "Maybe you." But I knew where that might lead. And I couldn't go there. I had no desire since that day. I knew it was a mental block, not a physical one. But I couldn't control it. I knew Janet was flawed, and there were probably good women out there, but I also knew I couldn't trust any woman. Besides, I didn't deserve anything better. Everyone thinks things will work out for them, just like at the Stade de France. So in a way, it was a relief. No desires meant I could enjoy life without needing to please anyone else. And a relationship was just a distraction. Still, I remembered the good times with Janet. But I knew how that story ended. I couldn't start a new one, so no, I wasn't going to begin anything with this amazing woman. Even if she was genuine, which she probably wasn't, she was too perfect. I stood up and said, "This has been the best evening I've had in over a year, and you are fascinating. I hope I see you tomorrow." Then I walked to the elevators and my room. I glanced back as I opened the patio door. Lady Britt was still sitting there, looking sad and disappointed, like she had hoped for more. Poor woman. I had a moment of regret. It was too bad I hadn't met her 7 years ago. Maybe my life would be different. But then again, she was beautiful. What would she have ever seen in a nerd like me? The next day was bright and sunny, just like only the Mediterranean can be. I met the guys at the Explorers pub, just as planned. They both looked terrible from their hangovers. I wasn't feeling great either. My talk with Lady Britt had brought back lots of bad memories, and I tossed and turned all night. I couldn't stop thinking about her, but it wasn't in a romantic way. Her soul spoke to me. Janet had many of the same qualities. The Janet I knew was kind and caring, but Lady Britt had even more qualities. She had everything I could ever want in a woman or a wife. She was warm and understanding, smart, full of life, hard-working and honorable. People like her are rare nowadays. She must have had great lessons. I thought Cone was like the devil for bringing her into this. I knew my thoughts were silly as I stood on the porch looking in, but I couldn't stop myself from thinking. A Kuwaiti man had invited the guys on his boat. He was a smooth-talking, chubby man, about 20 years older than me. It was clear he had known Bill and maybe Mike before. He acted like he owed them. I didn't ask for details. This man was rich and got us special access for the Carburation Day events. Carburation Day is an old term. Nowadays, they adjust cars using computers, but the starting grid spots are also decided on Saturday. Teams like Mercedes, Williams, Ferrari, Renault, and McLaren were busy trying to get an edge for their racers. The drivers were pushing hard to be in front. The Grand Prix has been in Monaco since 1929. The event is very dangerous due to the narrow streets and obstacles. If it weren't a historic circuit, it wouldn't be approved today. Usually, the car that starts first wins due to the tight streets. Drivers can hit close to 200 miles an hour on the straight path along the waterfront. There might be more excitement today in the pits than in tomorrow's race. As we stood near the pit wall, the sound of engines and cars zooming past was thrilling. These engines are only 1.6 liters, or about 100 cubic inches, like a big Harley-Davidson motorcycle engine. But while the average Harley engine makes 120 horsepower, these engines make between 600 and 750 horsepower. I was curious about how they did that, not about the race itself. I watched a tech from the Williams team work on a Mercedes engine using computers. Just then, Cone and the Ashley sisters entered the pits. I looked back and saw Mike and Bill talking with the Kuwaiti. I thought, this could get awkward. As they walked toward the center of the pit area, Cone and Lady Britt came into Campbell's view. He looked surprised. Then he figured it out. He puffed up with anger and headed their way. Bill and I ran after him. Campbell reached Cone and punched him in the head, knocking him down. We got there as Cone was starting to get up, ready to hit Campbell back. It was about to turn nasty. I grabbed Cone's arm and said, "Don't do anything stupid. The police are here. He's not worth it." Bill and some bystanders held Mike back. The Kuwaiti arrived with the police. They talked heatedly, but I couldn't hear because a long line of cars roared past. When the noise stopped, I saw Bill, the police, and the Kuwaiti walking Mike towards the harbor. Bill seemed to be holding him tightly. I looked at Cone and the two sisters. Brett looked amused, Britt looked horrified, and Cone looked angry. I said to Brett, "I thought you said there wouldn't be a problem." She replied in a bored tone, "I didn't think Mike would act like a child. I'm done with him. He needs to move on." I thought, what a selfish person. I wondered if she had even told Mike that clearly. A small voice in my head said, "They're all the same." I turned to Cone and asked, "Are you okay?" He smiled and said, "I've been hit harder in sports. I just didn't see it coming." Britt was looking at me strangely. She said, "It was brave of you to step in. It must have been hard for you. I can see you don't like violence." I smiled awkwardly and said, "I'm just a geek. I've never been in a real fight." I moved to the barrier to calm down. Britt walked with me. Brett and Cone were kissing. I rested my hands on the barrier, head down. Britt stood silently beside me. Once Brett and Cone were done, they also came to the barrier. A Ferrari car zoomed past us as they did. The driver made a quick move past a McLaren just 4 feet from where we stood. It was either very brave or very foolish, depending on how you see it. But it was a brilliant move by the driver. The man in that racing car must have been really great at what he did. The driver gave us a small sorry wave as his car's wind almost knocked us down. He came back 2 minutes later while we were still trying to pull ourselves together. He came up the pit road, revving his engine as he slowed down and quickly pulled into the Ferrari pits. The pit crew helped him get out of his car and take off his helmet. I heard Lady Brett gasp. If she was the picture of female beauty, the young man in the car was her match on the male side. Wow, he was handsome. He walked over to where we were standing, never taking his eyes off Lady Brett. Even though it seemed impossible, he must have seen her as he zoomed past us at 80 miles an hour. They say race car drivers have excellent vision and reflexes. This proved it. But then again, Brett was really stunning. Her eyes were glazed over. She was putting her hand on her chest, breathing heavily, clearly very excited. Cone was angry. I couldn't blame him. Brett looked like she wanted to throw herself at the guy right then and there. The young driver smiled charmingly at all of us and said in heavily accented English, "Forgive me for the close pass. I was on my qualifying lap and trying to get around the slow driver." He wasn't big, but no race car driver is. He looked like a Calvin Klein model, but maybe more fit and better looking. He had that classic 3-day beard, which must have itched under his helmet. He was also in his early 20s. He had large, soulful brown eyes and that pale skin with thick curly hair that really attractive people from Spain often have. He was like a smaller, thinner version of a young Antonio Banderas. No wonder women threw themselves at his feet. He turned and extended his hand to Brett and said, "My name is Pedro Romero. I might be Spanish, but I drive for the Italians. And who are you, beautiful lady?" It looked like Brett was having a moment as she extended her hand and breathlessly said, "Lady Brett Ashley." Her accent seemed even fancier. Cone put his arm around her and extended his other hand to Romero. He said, "And I am Robert Cone. I'm sorry we can't stay, but we have an appointment." He then pulled Brett towards the exit, leaving me, Britt, and Romero standing there, all of us looking confused. It was definitely an ungraceful exit, and I am sure Romero understood why. With the way he looked and his job, he must be used to jealous husbands, lovers, and boyfriends. I extended my hand and said, "Jake Barnes, and this is Lady Britt Ashley, Brett's sister." Since English was a problem for him, I didn't try to explain the alliteration. He looked at Britt and seemed to be sizing her up. The problem was he came to the same conclusion I had. Britt was more attractive than Brett. If he had been a guided missile, I would have heard his lock-on signal loud and clear. His whole manner changed. He did everything but bat his eyes at her like a cartoon character. He said very courteously, "It is my pleasure to meet such a beautiful woman. Would you like me to show you the area behind our pits? It is fascinating." She said, "Why, thank you. Can Jake come with us?" That was a silly question. He looked at me, put on a very regretful face, and said, "No, I am sorry, but I'm only allowed to have one guest at a time back there." My jealousy meter went off the scale. Holy cow! What was that? Feelings? It was like a guy who had been paralyzed suddenly discovering his feet itched. Britt looked regretful herself. She said, "Then I will have to turn down your kind invitation. But perhaps you would care to join us for drinks after you finish for the day. We are having a little party on the Crystal Terrace this evening at 7 o'clock. She smiled sweetly at Romero. Then she took my arm, turned, and started pulling me towards the pit exit. My heart swelled with joy. I had forgotten about the roller coaster a woman can take you on. This stunning and kind lady had just chosen to be with me. Instead of going with the most handsome racing driver in the world, I wondered which episode of The Twilight Zone I was in. It was both exciting and scary to discover how deep my feelings were for Lady Britt Ashley. My first instinct was to stamp them out, but Britt had been nothing but kind and courteous to me. I was not going to reward her respect by acting badly. Still, I had promised myself to never get hurt again, and this woman was like walking danger. As we walked, she was talking to me in her classy accent about how the techs fine-tuned the fuel and timing using the car's computer systems. It was unsettling. She seemed to be ignoring the fact that the most attractive man had just invited her to go with him, or maybe handsome and glamorous didn't mean much to her. She was holding my arm against her soft chest while we walked, and I could feel its softness against the hard body it was attached to. And miracle of miracles, I began to feel hopeful again. It had been so long that I almost didn't recognize it. The feeling was like waking up from a long coma. In the meantime, she kept talking nerdy to me, and I couldn't take my eyes off her beautiful face. When we got back to the hotel, I called Gorton. He said that Campbell had been drinking all afternoon. I told him about the party and suggested he keep Mike away from it. Britt was standing with me in the lobby. I looked at my watch and saw that we had about an hour to change. I asked her if she wanted to grab a drink on the patio. She told me that women need a lot of time to look casual and that she had to go to her room and get ready. I felt disappointed. I think she noticed. She gently touched my cheek. It was the first time someone's touch had felt that gentle since I said goodbye to Janet that memorable morning. Britt said, "We'll need to talk tonight, Jake. I want to know what you're thinking." That could mean so many things. Normally, I would have left, but I felt caught in her charm. So instead, I smiled and said, "I'll see you at 7 o'clock." I shaved, showered, and walked out to the patio right at 7 o'clock. It felt like being back in high school, hoping to see Beverly Johnson at the dance. The patio was huge, but Cone and his friends had reserved a special section for important guests. I wasn't important. I was there because Britt invited me, but Romero was also there. When Romero walked up, the guard let him into the party easily. After all, he was a big star. But the guard didn't let me in, so I waited in the public area, hoping Cone or Britt would notice me. I wasn't too insulted. I'm used to being left out. But watching the fancy people having fun made me realize a few things. Against my better judgment, I had started to think about Britt a lot. She seemed so kind, smart, and caring. She was also very beautiful. She had a natural style and honesty that made her even more attractive. And since all of this beauty came from who she was inside, I knew she'd still be beautiful when she was 88. I couldn't see her with Romero. She had too much class for him. And he was a few years younger. But I wouldn't blame her if she wanted to spend a weekend with him. He was famous, after all. And then there was me. I had already failed with a woman who was on my level socially. I couldn't imagine trying with someone as stunning as Britt. I finally saw her standing with Cone and Brett by the buffet table. She had an energy that drew people in. She wore a light silk flowered dress that showed a little cleavage and her perfect legs. She had on a hat and veil that only classy English women can wear, but it was her body in that dress that really spoke to me. She was breathtaking. Romero walked straight to her. They started talking. He stood very close to her. She looked a bit uncomfortable but didn't step back. She laughed and held his arm. I thought she was showing she liked him. I shouldn't have felt anything. It was natural for them to like each other. She was gorgeous, and so was he. But it did hurt. I was mad at myself. How could I let my guard down like that? I whispered to myself, I won't forget this lesson. I was about to leave when Romero said something to Britt and nodded in my direction. I gave her a small wave, thinking it was my goodbye. She looked at me with real anger. I thought, oh no! She thinks I'm ruining her moment with Romero. So I turned and left. I was very mad at myself. A whole year of healing wasted because I was too weak to follow my own rules. I couldn't just sit in my room. So I went to the Explorer pub, thinking I might find Bill and Mike there. I had my defenses up again and was ready for anything. They were out on the terrace overlooking the harbor. That harbor had been there since the Greeks. It's so old it's named after Hercules. Bill was happy to see me. He probably knew Mike might need some help. I shouldn't have felt sorry for Mike. I didn't have any claim to the other sister, but getting drunk seemed like a good idea. Mike kept talking about what he would do to Cone. I finally said, Look, Mike, it's not Cone's fault. Brett is just like that. You can't change her. You need to let her go or she will destroy you. If it's any comfort, Cone will be in the same spot as you once she gets bored with him. What I wanted to say was, don't waste your time over someone like Brett. But I knew that would make him angry. I was also thinking about my own situation with Britt. I knew Britt was different from her sister. But the idea of her and Romero together didn't feel good to me either. We had several beers while we talked. It was an exciting time sitting around in a nice place, learning about Grand Prix racing. I grew up in NASCAR land, and the idea of Italians, Germans, French, and Brits driving around narrow European streets in tiny cars seemed funny. But that changed when I saw the races. Suddenly, even Dale Jr.'s Chevy seemed simple and weak. Bill and the Kuwaiti guy were betting on who might win, and it looked like Romero was the favorite. I was sure he was going to win big tonight. I had enough of the talk because Campbell kept bringing up how Brett had wronged him. Finally, I said, "Grow up, Mike. You need to learn to leave things that are bad for you." Really, I was talking to myself, too. Campbell got up like he was going to hit me. I ducked, and Bill grabbed him in the same lock he used earlier. Bill quickly said, "Thanks for the evening, Allie. I'll see you back on the boat." Then he walked his friend to the exit, grumbling, "Come on, you fool." Allie looked at me, and I smiled. I said, "You need to help him understand that he can't force things to happen." Again, talking to myself, he said, "I will, my friend. In the meantime, join us on my boat tomorrow. You are very welcome. Bring that lovely woman who likes you, too." I was confused and asked, "What lovely woman?" I couldn't remember any woman showing interest in me. He said, "Lady Brett's sister. Are there any others?" He sounded like he thought I was joking. I felt shocked. "Why would you say that? She's probably with Pedro Romero right now." Allie laughed and said, "If she is, it's because you let her." Then he left some money on the table and walked out. I was thinking about what he said when my phone rang. I thought it was Bill updating me about Mike. Instead, it was the only other person in Monte Carlo who had my number. Cone sounded worried. He said, "You have to meet me in the lobby right now. Romero took off with her." Then he hung up. "Oh no! Romero took off with Britt. I thought he might be with her tonight, but kidnapping?" I ran across the street dodging heavy traffic. This was urgent, and I was scared. I thought Britt was so classy. I'm such an idiot. When I entered the lobby, Cone was pacing like a caged animal. I ran to him and, out of breath, asked, "Robert, where is she? I'll hurt him if he harms her." He looked upset and said, "It's Brett. She disappeared. I think she's with Romero." My first thought was, "What?" Then pure happiness hit me. A worried voice behind me said, "Jake, are you okay? Where did you go?" I turned, and there she was, looking concerned. She was beautiful and elegant. Suddenly, everything changed. My walls came down. I was fully in love with this woman. It might sound silly, but seeing her made my heart soar. If love means feeling deeply connected, then I was truly in love. Britt is very smart. She immediately understood. I didn't need to say a word. I saw compassion and understanding on her face. Maybe something else, too. I said, "But I thought you were with Romero." She looked shocked and said, "Why would I be with him? I've been here waiting for you to return." She seemed calm but worried. She knew what I had been thinking and let me feel bad for doubting her. I got lost in her kind gray eyes again. I said, "Never mind that, we can talk later." Then I turned back to Robert and said, "How can we help?" He said, "You left, and Britt went to find you. When she didn't come back, I went out to look for her. She told me she was waiting for you here, so I came back inside and Romero and Brett were gone. That's when I called you." I was wrestling with my feelings. Britt had waited for me, but I said, "Let's think it through. They could be in two places, the RV that follows those guys or the pits." I thought he might try to charm Brett like he did Britt earlier, but I knew Brett would be easier to fool. I didn't want Robert to catch them together. So I said, "Let's check the pits, and you check the RV. They might be there since it has a comfy bed." I was sure they were in the pits. I didn't want Robert to get in trouble for catching them. He said, "Yes, that sounds right. I'll find her." And he ran off. I turned to Britt and said, "I thought you and Romero were going to be together tonight. That's why I left. I couldn't stand the thought." She looked surprised and amused. She said, "Why would you think I'd be interested in that guy? Does that woman over there interest you?" She added, pointing to a woman in a revealing outfit who just came off a party boat in the harbor. I replied, "No way. She probably has had a lot of plastic surgery. I like women who are natural and also smart. I may be a typical guy, but I need to connect with someone before I get close to them." She laughed and said, "Exactly. I could never feel that way about Romero." We walked, holding hands towards the pits. I was sure we would find them there. It was a beautiful night. The air was perfect, and a gentle breeze brought the smell of flowers from the hills. After a long and chaotic day, it was peaceful at the pits. Some mechanics were still quietly working on the cars under bright lights. There were guards everywhere. Most of them remembered us from earlier in the afternoon. But I think Britt's beauty helped us get through without trouble. A beautiful woman can often charm French and Italian guards. We walked past the Ferrari pits towards the temporary sheds where they store extra tires and parts. I was glad Britt was with me because I would need her help with her sister. I wasn't scared of Romero. He might be a racing champion, but I was almost half a foot taller and about 100 pounds heavier. Still, if we interrupted Britt in the middle of the act, I might need Britt's help. We quietly opened the shed door and heard loud sounds. Britt was saying, "Yes, harder! More! More!" She was leaning over a stack of tires, and Romero was with her. Her chest was exposed, and Romero was touching her. There was a strange mix of smells, rubber, oil, and other things. She yelled out, "Yes!" Britt stood there, calm as ever. She had either seen this before or was just that composed. I didn't know what to do. They weren't hurting anyone except maybe themselves. But then Cone suddenly appeared behind us. He must have figured out I was trying to send him on a wild goose chase. He saw Romero and got extremely angry, then rushed past us. He tackled Romero, who screamed and fell several feet away, landing on his back. Romero wasn't completely knocked out, but was clearly stunned. Britt screamed and fell onto the stack of tires. Cone grabbed her roughly and put her back in the same position she was in before. She didn't fight back. She just looked over her shoulder, moving slightly. Cone quickly took Romero's place. Britt moaned and started pushing back against Cone, urging him on. Britt and I were standing there, stunned. It was like watching animals. I felt embarrassed for them. Meanwhile, Romero woke up. As Britt encouraged Cone, Romero ran past us, clutching his pants. Britt and Cone continued, reaching the same loud climax we heard when we first opened the door. I just wanted to get out of there. I had seen questionable behavior before, like with my ex-wife, but never anything this blatant. We left, closing the door behind us. We walked quietly back to the hotel. Neither of us spoke. What we had just seen made me feel ashamed to be human. When we got to the lobby, Britt turned me to face her. She looked serious and said, "Jake, we need to talk." "I know," I said. "Where? Can we go somewhere private? I need some peace after what we just saw," she replied. One option was my room, but that didn't feel right. I suggested, "I've heard the exotic garden is a nice, quiet place at night." She said, "Thank you." That wasn't as strange a response as it might seem. She thanked me for not asking her to come see my art. I parked the Evoque in a small lot near the garden entrance. It was quiet and peaceful as we walked hand in hand through the entrance. We found a spot where we could sit and look at the Mediterranean and Monaco to our left. The sky was dark purple with countless stars. The Mediterranean is special at night. The silence and beauty were breathtaking. We found a bench. She sat next to me, facing me but not touching. She wasn't being unfriendly. She just needed some space. This was not romance. We were about to have a serious talk. We both approached things the same way. I said, "When I saw you with Romero, it almost killed me. I don't know you well, and I worried you might be like your sister. I'm very sorry I thought that." She said, "Your mistake is understandable. He did make a move on me while you watched. That probably showed in his body language. I kept pushing him away, but he kept trying. I didn't know you were there until he pointed you out. I could imagine what you thought was happening between us. It made me furious. He clearly wanted you to think something was going on. Then you left before I could explain. I looked for you, but you had already gone. So I waited in the lobby. I knew you would come back sooner or later. That's when Robert showed up, and you know the rest. Why were you so upset? I would have come to you as soon as I knew you were there. Is this about that dark cloud always hanging over you?" I said, "I came home from work one day. My wife of 5 years told me she was leaving for a man she'd been seeing for 6 months. I trusted her. I didn't see it coming. Since then, I haven't trusted anyone, especially women. I don't let anyone get close enough to prove me wrong. I don't want to be this way, but it's been how I am for the past 14 months. I came to France to fix my self-respect. I needed to find a new direction in life." I thought I was getting better. But then I saw you with Romero. It felt like the same thing all over again. I couldn't handle the pain. So I went to find Bill and Mike. Mike is the poor guy who loved Brett. I thought I knew how he felt. I misjudged you badly, and I'm sorry. I hope we can get to know each other better without my doubts getting in the way. She looked at me with wide eyes and said, "What do you think about what you saw with my sister? Do you think I'm like her because we're related?" I said, "God, no. That was like something from Animal Planet. I believe you are smart and level-headed, honest and honorable. You are no more like Brett than I am like Cone. Their behavior isn't normal for either of us." Then she got serious. She said, "Do you see me like you see your ex-wife?" That made me think. I said, "Janet was smart, funny, and beautiful like you, but she had problems I didn't see. In my mind, you are a perfect mix of beauty, intelligence, and kindness. Even in the short time I've known you, your intellect and self-confidence have drawn me in like never before. I believe you are genuine, but I can't be sure until I know you better. I want to try if you're willing." She looked pleased with my answer. She said, "All my life I've been Lady Brett Ashley's little sister. No one has judged me for who I am or what I do. They just see me as a younger version of Brett. And I don't want to be like her. I've had a few boyfriends, and I might enjoy closeness more than Brett. But there has to be a connection before I consider being intimate with a man. Without connection, it's just animal behavior. It might feel good, but it's no different than what animals do. I like to think I've grown past that. I need to feel the other person during that act. It's important because I need to give myself completely to feel any real connection. Brett's way would destroy me." The thought of Britt giving herself to another man made me feel jealous. I knew that this was a normal part of life, but Britt and I had formed such a strong bond that I didn't want to even imagine her with someone else. I admitted to myself that my jealousy was irrational, but the feeling was still there, and it scared me. What was happening to my calm, detached self? Meanwhile, she kept talking, unaware of my jealousy. She said, "I know I am attractive to men, and honestly, that is more upsetting than anything else. I believe I'm more than just my looks. I need a man to want me for my smarts and who I am inside. The problem is, everyone tries to put me in a box, even my coworkers. They joke that my breasts distract the men and make them lose IQ points. Imagine if people only judged you based on the size of the bulge in your pants. That's how it feels for me. So I have tried hard to downplay my sexuality." I thought to myself, if she is trying to downplay it, I can't imagine what she would be like if she tried to play it up. I knew she would outshine her sister, and her sister was the most beautiful woman I had ever seen. Britt looked worried as she said, "I have done some big things in my short academic career, things that would be a huge deal for a man. And the only recognition I've gotten is that I am attractive? That is both unfair and humiliating. I want to be appreciated for who I am, not just for how I look. My relationships need to be based on mutual respect. I want a life with a man who respects me, not one based on my looks or sexuality. When I eventually commit to a man, it will be for life. Passion fades and beauty changes. But a strong bond between a man and a woman will always need to be there for me to be happy. From the beginning, I saw your basic decency, your willingness to treat me as your partner, not just your woman, and that drew me to you immediately. You also have a sharp mind, which is crucial for me in a lifelong partner. And truthfully, I have wanted to move forward with you since we met. I know you have trust issues, so I will do what feels right to help you overcome your past experiences. But I want to progress in our relationship. I promise you, you will never regret it." She said all this in a calm, neutral tone. It was an exchange of ideas between two people who think alike. There was no romantic tone or intense feelings. More importantly, the underlying message was not like many other getting-to-know-you talks that suggest physical intimacy after solving a problem. It was exactly how I would approach things if I was trying to build a true connection with someone. It reinforced my belief that Lady Britannia Ashley was the woman for me, a special person I could always trust and build a life with. Being alone is not natural for people, and I realized I needed someone, even though I had been trying to convince myself otherwise. But after what I had been through, committing to a woman meant I needed complete trust in her. This calm, smart, honorable, and beautiful woman was offering to build a relationship with me carefully, and I felt she had the intelligence and grace to do that. I leaned towards her, and she leaned towards me in the same way. It was a magical, compelling moment. That first kiss was the sweetest and most natural kiss I had ever received. No intense passion or big gestures. It was simply the merging of two people. As we kissed, everything fell into place, and I felt whole again. Only a fool would ignore the importance of that moment. We pulled apart. She made a soft sound. You could see the wild passion in her gray eyes, but then she controlled it. She had an inner fire, but it was under strict control. I knew I would see that passion again, but only when she chose to show it. I appreciated that she controlled her feelings carefully. No sane man wants to be with a woman who can't control her urges. Britt's self-discipline and moral strength were two of the things I loved most about her. I said, "As far as I am concerned, that kiss seals our understanding. I can't believe my good luck. Things like this have never happened to me. But the moment I touched your lips, I knew you were the one for me. I believe in you, and I believe we can make it." We didn't sleep together that first night, or even while we were in Monte Carlo. In fact, we had been committed to each other for almost a month before we got to that part of our relationship. We watched the race from the Kuwaiti's boat. Romero had a bad day and eventually stopped, complaining of fatigue. It was probably due to bruised ribs. Britt stood out, even among the beautiful people, but her beauty meant nothing to either of us. We were alone together in the crowd. We were always connected by glances as we moved around, and she constantly showed me that she was by my side, even if she was 50 feet away talking to others. Her steady and unconditional companionship was better than physical intimacy. After 34 years and one failed marriage, I finally experienced what having a true life's partner was like. I was not outside looking in anymore. She had brought me inside, and I was at peace. The crowd of cheerful people was getting too much, so I leaned on the boat rail to find a little quiet time. She came over and leaned next to me. She bumped me with her shoulder. To me, that playful little bump meant much more than her sister's showy dance the night before. It felt special and meaningful. She looked out over the harbor toward the exotic garden and said, "I wish we were up there instead of here." I had been thinking the same thing. It felt nice to be with someone who liked the same things I did. Watching the race was boring, and talking to rich people was tiring. Britt grew up in a fancy family. I knew a proper young English lady couldn't ignore her social duties, but since I hated small talk, I felt her childhood must have been tough. I had two thoughts. The first one I kept to myself. "Seriously, an English lady as beautiful as her is with me? It feels like a fairy tale." The other thought was more important. I said, "You're as bored as I am, aren't you?" She nodded quickly and said, "I'd rather be somewhere quiet with you, just reading and talking. Do you like to sail? I love the peace of being alone on a boat with someone." I didn't want to hear stories about her and someone else on a boat. I said, "That sounds like a perfect afternoon. My ex could never sit still or enjoy it. I have a small sailboat on the Potomac. My only company is my old dog, Buster." She laughed and said, "We have a lifetime of that ahead of us, and I am the best helper on any boat." She stood up straight and gave me a British salute. Her playful smile was wonderful. Then we had to go our separate ways that evening. But I wasn't sad. I knew we would be together for a lifetime, so the wait only made me look forward to seeing her more. She flew out of Nice, and I drove back to Paris with the boys. It took me a few weeks to get things settled at home. The main thing was making sure everything was ready for us to be together permanently. Her father was an earl. He was still healthy, so we wouldn't live in the big family house for a while, and we were not the kind of people to live like lords and ladies anyway. Britt did important work at Oxford, and I would never ask her to give it up. Where I lived wasn't important. I had enough money to live anywhere. Even a simple tent in Patagonia would be fine with Britt there. So, Oxford made sense. Britt had her own money, but I had so much in the bank that I offered to buy a place near the university if she wanted, or at least rent something close so we could take our time. Being sensible, she chose the second option. She said, "I want this to work, and I want a strong foundation before we dive in. I love you, and I want us to be happy together for a long time. Let's be smart about it." That showed how Britt was different from any other woman I had known. We talked and messaged all the time while apart. She called a couple weeks later to tell me there was a job at the OCL. If I took it, we could work together. I decided right away. I checked out of the hotel the next morning and drove to Calais. It should be a 3-hour trip, but with traffic, it took 4 hours. I reached Dover in the early afternoon and Oxford by the evening. I got a room at the Randolph and called her. She was happy to hear from me early. That was different from Janet, my ex. While Janet saw time apart as a chance to do other things, Britt seemed eager to see me. We met in the Morse Bar. Yes, it's named after the TV character. I was sitting in the back bar with its fancy wood paneling when she came in from the Beaumont Street entrance. It was a warm, clear evening. She must have walked the 5 minutes from the OCL down St. Giles to the Randolph. She wore a light silk dress for the nice weather. She wore a dress that showed off her curves in a stunning way. She was looking for me with her mysterious smile. Her face brightened when she saw me. It felt like something magical was happening, like heavenly music playing. Though it had been 3.5 weeks since we last met, it was as if no time had passed. She was still fascinating. I had a glass of whiskey in front of me. When she arrived, she hugged me, kissed my cheek like an old friend, and ordered the same drink. Even after almost a month apart, it was easy and relaxed. We aren't the type for grand gestures. Our connection is strong because of that. She was full of energy and joy. I asked, "Working late, dear?" She replied, "Yes, I finished my project for the week. I want to spend a lot of time with you." There was no mistaking what she meant. We talked politely, catching up on news. We wanted to leave the bar and head upstairs with some sense of decorum. Soon I was on the bed, waiting. She came out of the bathroom, walking towards me. Her beauty was highlighted by the soft light from the curtains. She had a fit body, and she moved gracefully. She jumped onto the bed with a laugh, landing next to me. She lay there, looking up at me. I lay beside her, propped up on my elbow, gazing into her deep gray eyes. They were incredibly beautiful and intense. I could see her intelligence and strength in her eyes. I could also see her passion and love. Her eyes drew me in, full of warmth and care. She was showing me how much she trusted and loved me. Every story needs an ending. But mine with Britt does not end. We are true equals. She is beautiful and the best partner imaginable. Her looks are nothing compared to her strength and loyalty in facing life's challenges together, never leaving my side. We have shared many moments in our life, but there is only one person who has gone through everything with me, and that is her. The true joy of our marriage is sharing those moments together. We've faced hard times and good times, always side by side. We are like two strong oxen standing back to back when danger comes. Each of us protects the other with our horns pointed out, keeping the wolves at bay. It feels like pure luck that I met and married this woman, who I still think is way beyond my reach. This chance meeting happened once in a lifetime, but I suppose that's the lesson. The truth is, your life is only as big or meaningful as the people in it. I missed that point while thinking deeply at the Stade de France. In reality, most of us just go with the flow. There is no script. We never know when someone new or an event will show up and change everything. Similarly, success is just about noticing when something important appears, and then acting on that knowledge with courage. That was true for Britt and me. We weren't sure what the big events in Monte Carlo would bring, but we knew they mattered to each other. So we took the steps we needed to build our bond. Then we worked very hard over the years to keep that bond strong. I've led a happy life up to my 50th year. During that time, Brett and Cone have married each other twice. Now I hear they have an open marriage. As I said, they belong together. Gorton and Campbell went back to the States. I wished both of those old soldiers well. I heard nothing more about my dad after the divorce, but I believe karma will catch up to him. It always does with people like that. Romero has been the F1 world champion twice and also won at Indy. I wished him well too. The fact is, I won the real prize. We have been married for almost 16 years, and in my eyes, my wife is as fresh and lovely as the day we met in Monte Carlo. Now, she shares the love of my life with our beautiful daughter, Brooke. You're right, we kept the B theme. Brooke has been my pride and joy since her birth. Her beauty and smarts match her mother's even if she's only 14. We live on part of the estate that Britt's father gave us as a living trust. The inheritance taxes are huge. I had our house built to match the Earl's castle, or whatever you call a place with nearly 30 bedrooms. The main difference is that our heating and plumbing are much more modern. I'm not an outdoorsy person, but it's nice to look out over 200 acres of your own land. Both my girls love to ride horses, so they have plenty of space for that. Brooke is in the UK's Excel Talent program, which helps young people who might become Olympians. She rides a chestnut horse that looks so noble it could have led a famous charge, and 14-year-old Brooke rides it with the same confidence as a great leader. Like many British nobles, Britt is an expert horsewoman. It's one of many things she does better than most people. She rides a big, black stallion. It's so big and fierce-looking that the headless horseman should be chasing someone on it. But my wife handles that scary beast like everything else in her life, firmly, gently, and gracefully. And it responds to her like a happy puppy, even though I swear I've seen it snort fire. I had one last special moment with the woman I love. Let me tell you about it. Britt's father has a world-class art collection of French Impressionists, which he lent to the Corcoran. Britt and I went with the collection. Britt was there to represent her father. I went because I love her and didn't want to be away from her. I had sold our old condo when I retired to my life in England. So while in D.C., we stayed at the Madison Hotel. I was at the dull, pre-opening event that places like the Corcoran throw to keep wealthy donors happy. As the Earl's daughter, Britt was busy doing her noble duties. I was in the corner with the loveliest girl in the room. She was wearing a deep blue cocktail dress and high heels, with her hair done like a grown woman. She could have easily passed for a college student. I was holding a glass of scotch with ice, and she had a drink with strawberries and lemonade. Brooke has her mother's perfect face on a 14-year-old body, which is also starting to look a lot like her mother's. I am very protective of my little girl, which my wife finds very funny. But now that Brooke is becoming a stunning copy of Britt, I've thought about sending her to a safe, remote place. On the other hand, Brooke also has her mother's great intelligence and sense of self, so I trust she will handle growing up just as well as her mother did, and she will always have her wise mother to rely on for advice. Brooke must be the only teen on the planet who thinks her parents are cool. I think it's thanks to Britt's strict but loving way of raising Brookie and me that we often find ourselves in trouble together. We always get a scolding from Britt after our latest mischief. My job is to teach Brookie to be strong and independent. We stood in front of a Degas painting. Brookie was talking seriously about the brushstrokes. I glanced at Britt. That's when I saw that Shithead and Janet had arrived. Since they were big donors, the Corcoran staff brought them over to meet Britt. I thought to myself, of course, these snobs would never miss an event like this. I almost expected Janet to bow when she met Britt. Shithead had a look on his face like he was thinking worse. It was clear he couldn't keep his eyes to himself. As they were introduced, Britt looked at me. She heard who they were. I nodded. She instantly became the picture of nobility. My fun, down-to-earth wife turned into someone regal and superior. She could have rivaled Queen Elizabeth in looking royal and distant. They spoke for a few minutes. Janet looked awed and starstruck. Shithead, meanwhile, kept trying to see down Britt's dress. I had to admit, she looked amazing in her little black dress with pearls. Then Britt led them over to me and Brookie. They seemed confused. Janet had not aged well. She looked older than she was and had the nervous look of someone whose husband is always unfaithful. Meanwhile, Shithead was flirting with Britt. Both of them looked shocked when they saw me. It was like I had appeared from nowhere. Janet said with dripping disdain, "Why, Jake? What are you doing here? This is not your kind of event." Shithead sneered, "Yes, isn't this a bit too fancy for you? Don't you feel out of place?" I replied cheerfully, "Hello to you too. It has been a long time, hasn't it? 16 years and a good woman can really change a person." I said, "You're right. These events are boring. I'm just here to support my wife." Janet asked with a bit of interest, "Oh, is your wife part of the committee?" I said, "Not exactly." They still looked confused as to why Britt had brought them to talk to me. I added, "I mainly came here to introduce my daughter Brooke to Washington society." They turned to Brookie, who was glaring at them with a look colder than King Henry VIII gave his ex-wives. They both gasped, "She's your daughter?" I admitted that Brookie was a beautiful young woman. In her dress and heels, she could pass for 25. I said, "Yes, meet Lady Brooke Ashley Barnes." They did the math. Janet turned to Britt and asked, "Jake's your husband?" I smiled and said, "For the past 16 wonderful years." Britt moved next to Brookie and me and took my hand lovingly. She said, "Jake and I met in Monte Carlo, and I've adored him since the moment I saw him. We live on the estate in Gloucestershire, but still work part-time at GCHQ in Cheltenham. Our daughter boards at Dean Close School there." Brookie, clearly upset at how Janet and Shithead treated me, said in a posh voice, "Yes, only the best people prep there. Common people like you wouldn't qualify." I understood what she was doing. Brookie usually sounded like her mom, not like Princess Diana. Both Janet and Shithead looked absolutely stunned. I had to rub it in. I turned to Janet and said as sincerely as I could, "You were right, Janet. I wouldn't have this wonderful life if it wasn't for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart." Janet got it. She was smart and hated it, but she understood. Then I turned to Britt and Brookie and said, "We've done our duty here. Don't you think it's time to leave?" Britt smiled at me and said in her best posh accent, "Certainly, my dear. Being around all these stuffy people is dreadfully boring." The message was clear. Shithead and Janet had been dismissed. The two loves of my life each took an arm and we turned to go. But not before I saw Janet. She was glaring angrily at Shithead, who was staring at Britt's back. Janet's look of complete hatred was priceless. I thought to myself, George Herbert was right. Living well really is the best revenge. Hey, audience, if you like this video and want to keep up with more thrilling stories, make sure to subscribe to Prince Cheating Tales and hit the notification bell. You don't want to miss out on our upcoming adventures. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next wonderful story.